Decca's tray hit the marble floor with a violent crash just as Tade Okoye's voice thundered across the dining hall. "Pick it up and get out of my house." Every servant froze. No one dared breathe. But Decca did not kneel. Instead, on her very first day as a maid, she lifted her chin and pointed at the broken crystal near the polished shoe of Amaka Okoye. "She didn't trip because of me," Decca said, her voice shaking but clear. Someone moved the chair on purpose. A ripple of shock tore through the room. Because no one had ever defied Tade Okoye in his own home, and no one expected the feared CEO to step forward, stare at the poor village girl in silence, and look at her as if he had just found something priceless. "Before we go on, tell me honestly, if speaking the truth could cost you your job on the very first day, would you still do it? And where are you watching from today? Drop your country and local time in the comments. If you enjoy emotional stories filled with shocking twists, justice, and healing, subscribe and stay with me for the next part." The silence after Decca spoke felt more dangerous than shouting. No one in the dining hall moved. The older servants kept their eyes lowered, as if even looking up might drag them into the storm. One of the footmen slowly bent to gather the broken crystal, but he stopped when Tade Okoye lifted one finger. That tiny motion was enough. In that house, a gesture from him carried more force than a scream from anyone else. Decca could hear her own heartbeat. She had already crossed the line. There was no stepping back now. Amaka Okoye stood near the long dining table, in a silk dress the color of fresh cream, one hand still resting on the back of the chair beside her. Her face was composed, almost elegant, but her eyes had sharpened into something ugly. "Are you accusing me?" she asked softly. The softness was worse than rage. Decca swallowed. Her hands trembled, but she locked them at her sides so no one would see. "I am saying the chair was moved after Mama Ife set the tray down." A quiet gasp moved through the servants. Mama Ife, the elderly housekeeper who had been blamed for the accident only seconds earlier, looked as though she might collapse from shock. Her grey headscarf had slipped back slightly, and tears trembled in her tired eyes. She had spent 22 years in the Okoye household. She had cleaned after celebrations, sickness funerals, and scandals. Yet one broken tray had almost ended her life in the house. Amaka gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "This girl has been here for 1 hour, and already she thinks she understands how this house works." No one answered. Tade still had not taken his eyes off Decca. His expression was unreadable, which somehow made him more frightening. He was tall, sharply dressed even at breakfast, his presence heavy with the kind of power that entered a room before he did. Newspapers called him brilliant. Rivals called him ruthless. Employees called him many things in whispers, but never to his face. And yet he was not looking at Decca as if she had merely challenged him. He was studying her. That unsettled her more than anger would have. Tade's voice came low and controlled. "You said someone moved the chair on purpose. Explain." Amaka's head turned sharply toward him. "Tade, I said explain." He repeated, never glancing at his fiancée. Decca forced air into her lungs. "When Mama Ife was serving, the chair was closer to the table. I saw it because I was standing by the sideboard. After the tray fell, the chair was pulled back too far. And the broken glass?" She pointed carefully, not stepping forward. "Most of it fell toward Mama Ife, but the first spill line went sideways. That means she twisted at the last second. She didn't stumble on her own. She reacted to something sudden. The room became so still that the ticking clock at the far wall sounded loud. Amaka folded her arms. Or she is inventing a story because she cannot accept that servants from the village make mistakes. That word landed exactly as intended. Village. Poor. Lesser. Decca felt the insult burn, but she kept her face neutral. She had heard worse. She had heard it in markets, buses, clinic hallways, and from women who wore gold crosses while crushing other people with their mouths. A name for poverty was never just a name. It was a way of telling you to shrink. But she had not come to the Okoye mansion to shrink. Not with Mama Sade lying sick in a public hospital bed, not with old questions rotting inside her for years, and not with the memory of her mother whispering one name in feverish sleep again and again, Okoye. Tade turned at last. "Check the camera." Amaka went still, only for a second. But Deka saw it. A flicker. Enough. One of the security men near the door hesitated. "Sir, the dining hall camera has been under maintenance since last night." Another silence. Tade's jaw tightened. "How convenient." Amaka lifted a shoulder. "You are not seriously entertaining this nonsense?" A tray fell. "That is all." No, Tade said. "That is not all." He stepped closer to the shattered glass, crouched and examined the floor himself. The billionaire CEO, in an immaculate shirt, kneeling on polished marble beside, spilled juice and crystal, looked almost unreal. He touched the edge of the scrape mark near the chair leg. Then he rose slowly. "Mama Ife stays," he said. The older woman let out a broken breath and pressed both hands to her mouth. Tade continued. "And the new maid?" Deka braced herself. "Also stays." Every servant looked up at once. Amaka stared at him as though she had misheard. "After she insulted me in front of staff, she exposed an inconsistency." Tade replied, "That is not the same thing." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Amaka smiled then, but the smile did not reach her eyes. "As you wish." Deka understood immediately that this was not over. People like Amaka did not forgive humiliation. They stored it like poison. Tade straightened and addressed the room. "Breakfast is finished. Everyone return to work." Chairs shifted. Shoes whispered across marble. Servants dispersed with quiet haste, each person eager to escape before the next explosion. Mama Ife touched Deka's arm as she passed. It was only a brief touch, trembling and grateful, but it carried more weight than many speeches. "Thank you," the older woman whispered. Deka gave the smallest nod. She expected to be pulled aside by the head steward or marched to the service exit. Instead, 10 minutes later, a young male attendant approached her in the back corridor. "Mr. Okoye wants your assignment changed," he said. Deka frowned. "Changed? You'll work in the East Wing from today." That made the laundry girl beside her nearly drop a stack of folded napkins. "The East Wing," the girl repeated before she could stop herself. The attendant shot her a warning glance, but the damage was done. Deka had already heard the fear in her voice. "What is in the East Wing?" Deka asked. No one answered directly. The attendant only said, "The private family quarters, the library, the study corridor. You are to report to the upper hall after noon." Then he left. For a moment, Deka stood still. The private family wing. She had expected punishment, not access. Around her, the servant corridors seemed narrower now, crowded with whispers that stopped whenever she looked up. Some faces showed pity. Some showed irritation. A few showed something more dangerous, distance, the kind people kept from anyone they believed would soon be destroyed. By midday, the house itself seemed to change as she crossed from the service wing into the eastern side of the mansion. The floors became softer underfoot, covered in muted runners instead of hard stone. The walls carried framed oil portraits, carved masks, old family photographs, and expensive silence. Even the air smelled different here. Cedarwood polished leather flowers changed before they could wilt. A senior maid named Abini escorted her only halfway before stopping abruptly at a bend in the corridor. "I don't go farther unless called," Abini muttered. "Why?" Abini glanced left, then right, as if the walls might report her. "Because people who see too much in this house either learn to lie or disappear." Then she walked away. Deka stared after her. Disappear. The word sat cold inside her. She continued alone. At the end of the upper corridor hung a large portrait of the Okoye family from years ago. The frame was gold thick and severe. Tade stood in it, younger, sterner, beside an elegant woman whose beauty felt calm rather than flashy. His mother Decca assumed. Her posture was regal, but her eyes were warm. On the other side stood an older man, long dead, if the newspaper archive Decca remembered was correct. The father. But something was wrong with the portrait. A fourth figure had clearly once stood between them. The paint had been altered, not clumsily, expensively, professionally, yet not perfectly. Decca stepped closer. There, in the layered shadow between Tade and his mother, was the faint outline of a removed shoulder, a hidden hand, the trace of someone erased. Her pulse jumped. Why would a family erase a person from its own portrait? Before she could think further, a door opened behind her. She turned too fast. Amaka stood in the doorway of a sitting room holding a glass of sparkling water. Her face was calm again, almost pleasant. That was somehow worse. "You walk boldly for someone with no place here," Amaka said. Decca lowered her gaze just enough to remain polite without appearing broken. "I was sent here to work." Amaka took a slow sip. "Work is not the same thing as belonging." Decca said nothing. Amaka stepped closer. "Do you know what girls like you always misunderstand? Men like Tad do not respect defiance. They study it. They enjoy it for a moment. Then they crush it." Something cold slid through Decca's spine, but she held still. Amaka leaned in slightly. Her perfume was expensive and sharp. "So enjoy your little victory at breakfast. It will be your last." She moved away without waiting for a reply. Only after she disappeared into the room did Decca let herself breathe again. She turned back toward the portrait, but her attention had shifted, not only because of the erased figure, not only because of Amaka's threat. There was another detail now visible from this angle. Farther down the corridor beyond the study doors stood one door unlike all the others. Dark wood, brass handle. No decoration, no flowers, no dust either, though no one seemed to use it. A keyhole glinted beneath the afternoon light. Locked. The air around it felt wrong, too still, too guarded. As Decca stood there, a passing servant noticed where she was looking and immediately lowered his eyes. "No one enters that room," he murmured. "Why?" Decca asked. He shook his head once. "Because some memories in this house are not dead. They are only buried." Then he hurried away before she could stop him. Decca remained in the corridor staring at the locked door, the altered portrait, and the polished floor beneath her feet. This house was full of silence, but it was not empty silence. It was the kind that came after something had been broken and hidden before the pieces could be counted. And for the first time since arriving, Decca felt it with certainty. She had not stepped into a rich man's mansion. She had stepped into a wound. By the second morning, Decca understood one rule of the Okoye mansion more clearly than any spoken order. Nothing important was ever said directly. Instructions came in half sentences. Threats wore smiles. Fear walked softly in polished shoes. Even kindness, when it appeared, arrived like something ashamed of being seen. Decca rose before sunrise with the rest of the staff, tied her plain work apron, and moved through the servant corridors with lowered eyes. But inside, she was alert in a way she had not been in years. The house had changed shape for her after the breakfast incident. It no longer felt like a place where wealthy people simply lived. It felt like a place where the past had been locked in rooms covered with silk and forced to keep breathing. She spent the morning dusting the upper library under the supervision of a beanie, who spoke little and watched the hallway more than the bookshelves. The library was large enough to swallow the sound of footsteps. Tall windows let in pale morning light across shelves of leather-bound volumes, business awards, law books, old African history collections, and framed photographs from charity galas and government dinners. Tade Okoye's face appeared in many of them, composed, confident, difficult to read. In some pictures he stood beside Amaka, elegant and carefully matched to his image. In others he stood alone, But nowhere in the room did Decker see a recent photograph of his mother. That absence bothered her more than any portrait could have. "Don't touch the lower cabinet," Abini muttered while rearranging a side table. Decker glanced at the locked walnut cabinet beneath one of the shelves. Why Abeni did not answer at once. Then she said, "Because the last person who asked too many questions was gone by the end of the week." Decker looked up sharply. "Gone where?" Abini's expression tightened. "In this house people disappear in many directions. Dismissal is the kindest one." Before Decker could press further, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Abini straightened immediately, then grabbed a basket and slipped toward the back exit like smoke. A second later, Tade entered the library. He wore a dark suit, though it was still early, his tie slightly loosened, as if he had already been working for hours. There was a file in one hand and a phone in the other, but his attention shifted to Decker. The moment he saw her. "You're in the wrong section," he said. Decker set down the dust cloth. "I was assigned here." "By whom, Abeni?" Tade glanced toward the empty doorway, then back at Decker. "Of course." He moved past her toward the desk at the center of the library. Even without raising his voice, he changed the air around him. Decker hated that her body reacted to that power before her mind did. Her shoulders stiffened. Her pulse sharpened. He opened the file, scanned a page, then spoke without looking up. "You've been staring at things that don't concern you." Decker felt heat climb her throat. "I was cleaning. The portrait in the East Corridor." So he knew. She hesitated only a fraction too long. Tade closed the file. "You notice more than most." "That depends on what others are trying to hide," she answered before she could stop herself. The room went still. He lifted his head slowly. For one dangerous second, she thought she had gone too far again. But instead of anger, she saw something else in his eyes. Fatigue. Not weakness, not softness. Just the exhaustion of someone who had spent too long standing in a storm without moving. "You speak as if you know this house already," he said. "I know what buried truth feels like." The words slipped out quietly, but once spoken they remained between them. Teddy studied her for another moment. Then his phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression changing by a degree so small many would have missed it. Not fear, not surprise. Recognition. "Finish here," he said, "and stay out of locked rooms." He left before she could answer. Decker exhaled only after the sound of his footsteps disappeared. Stay out of locked rooms. That was not a normal warning. It was too specific, too deliberate. It sounded less like an order and more like a test to see whether she would obey. She returned to dusting, but her mind kept circling the same things the erased figure in the portrait. The locked room, the vanished staff member Abini had hinted at, and Tade's face when he mentioned the corridor. By noon, the staff shifted into lunch preparations. Decker carried folded linens toward the rear service stairwell that connected the upper wing to the back kitchen level. She was halfway down when she heard voices from the landing below. She stopped instantly. One of them was Tade's. The other belonged to an older man with a smooth, professional tone she did not recognize at first. Then memory clicked. She had heard that voice once before from behind a hospital curtain when Mama Sade whispered about rich people with clean hands and dirty secrets. Dr. Afolabi. Decker moved one step higher into the shadow of the stairwell and held her breath. "I am telling you the pressure is getting worse," Dr. Afolabi said. "These episodes will not disappear just because you refuse to name them." Tade answered in a low voice. "Keep your tone down. You should have let the investigation finish years ago." "And invite scandal onto a grieving family." Tade snapped, then immediately lowered his voice again. "My mother was dead. My father was breaking. Baker was circling the estate like a vulture. There was no clean ending left. Decca's fingers tightened around the folded linens. My mother. She leaned closer, barely daring to breathe. Dr. Afolabi spoke again, more carefully this time. I am not talking about public scandal. I am talking about truth. Your mother did not die in peace, Tada. She died frightened. You know that. Silence. Then Tada said, I know what I was told. That is exactly the problem. Decca felt cold race through her. Dr. Afolabi continued. The medications were changed in the final week. I flagged it then. I am flagging it now. There was no proof. There was never allowed to be proof. A long pause followed. Decca could hear only the distant hum of kitchen activity below and the hard beating of her own heart. When Tade spoke again, his voice was flatter, almost stripped bare. Why bring this back now because of the records request? Decca froze. What records request? Tade asked. The old household employment file. Someone accessed the archive summary last night. Decca nearly dropped the linens. Someone. He could not know it had been her. She had not opened any official file. She had only memorized the corridor of cabinets in the records room while delivering polish, and noticed one drawer with older labels scratched away. Had someone else been searching too? Tade's tone sharpened. Who? I don't know, Dr. Afolabi said. But if old names start resurfacing, the wrong people will panic. Another pause. Then Tade asked the question that made Decca's stomach turn. Did you ever find the missing entry? No, the doctor replied. The staff ledger from that year still has one altered line. One female employee's name was removed and replaced. Sloppily, but enough to mislead anyone who wasn't paying attention. Mama Sad. Decca knew it before the thought had fully formed. Her mother had once worked in this house. She had hinted at it in fevers, in fragments, in terrified apologies that never made sense when daylight returned. Decca had spent years wondering whether illness had twisted those memories into nonsense. Now the walls of that doubt were cracking. Tade spoke again, slower. And you're certain the woman connected to the final week disappeared afterward? I'm certain she never returned to collect wages. I'm certain your mother asked for her twice before she died. And I'm certain someone wanted that trail buried. Decca pressed one hand over her mouth. Your mother asked for her twice before she died. A servant. A woman whose name had been erased. A woman tied to the last week of the mistress's life. The blood roared in Decca's ears. Mama Sadeh had not been imagining the past. She had survived it. Footsteps shifted below. Decca shrank backward just as the conversation resumed. You need to be careful, Dr. Afolabi said. Bako still thinks the dead stay buried if you pour enough money over the grave. And Amaka Tade asked. The doctor gave a weary sigh. Amaka knows only enough to be dangerous, which in some ways is worse. Then came the sound of movement toward the corridor. Decca turned and climbed the remaining steps in near silence, her legs suddenly weak. She did not stop until she reached the upper hall. Only then did she force herself to breathe. The linen bundle was crushed in her arms. She stood there for several seconds, staring at nothing. So it was true. Tade's mother had not simply died after a tragic illness, as the newspapers claimed. Fear had surrounded her final days. Records had been altered. A female employee had vanished from the ledger. Bako's name hovered behind the shadows. Even Dr. Afolabi, a man who sounded cautious by nature, had spoken as if he had spent years swallowing what he knew. Decca moved before anyone could see her shaken. She made her way to the old records room on the pretense of delivering fresh dust cloths. The room was narrow and smelled of paper glue and dry wood. Tall cabinets lined the walls, each labeled by year department and estate division. Her hands moved faster now, less careful than before. She found the employment drawer for the relevant period and slid out the file stack with trembling fingers. Most names were typed cleanly. Gardeners, drivers, housemaids, temporary catering workers, visiting nurses. Then she saw it. One line near the middle had been corrected with another slip pasted over the original. The replacement name read M. Adenuga, but the alignment was wrong. The paper beneath was older and darker. Under the edge of the pasted strip, just barely visible where age had lifted the glue, there was the ghost of another letter. Not A.S. Decker's breath caught. S. Sard. The room spun for one terrifying moment. She reached out and steadied herself against the cabinet. The name had not only been removed, it had been replaced. Whoever had buried the truth had not wanted a blank space. They had wanted a false story. A floorboard creaked outside. Decker shoved the file back too quickly, nearly tearing the corner, and turned. No one stood in the doorway. But on the floor just beyond the threshold lay something small and silver. A cufflink. Expensive. Masculine. Etched with the letter B. Decker stared at it without moving. Then very slowly she understood. Someone had been standing outside while she searched. Someone who wanted her to know they had seen. Decker did not touch the cufflink. For several seconds she only stared at it from the doorway of the records room, her pulse hammering so hard it seemed to shake the air around her. The silver surface caught a thin beam of afternoon light, and the engraved B flashed once like a warning. Not dropped by accident, placed. That realization came first, cold and clean. Someone had stood outside while she searched the files. Someone powerful enough to move through the private wing without explanation. Someone confident enough to leave behind a message instead of hiding. "I see you." Decker swallowed and forced herself to breathe through her nose. Panic would make her careless. Carelessness would get her mother killed. She bent, picked up the cufflink with the edge of a dustcloth, and wrapped it without letting her skin touch the metal. Then she tucked it deep inside the pocket sewn beneath her apron lining. Mama Sade had stitched that hidden pocket years ago, back when Decker still sold roasted ground nuts near bus stations and needed somewhere to hide small notes of cash from thieves. Today it held something more dangerous than money. When she stepped into the corridor, her expression was calm again. That was one lesson poverty taught better than any school. Fear had to be managed in public. Rich people smelled vulnerability the way dogs smelled blood. She returned to work as if nothing had happened. But by evening, the mansion had begun transforming for the Okoye family's business reception, and the false glitter of wealth made the house feel even more sinister. Fresh flowers arrived in white vans. Florists moved quickly through the front hall, arranging ivory lilies and orchids in tall glass stands. Catering staff rolled in silver warming trays. Chandeliers were polished until they glowed like captured fire. Outside, black luxury cars began to line the circular drive. Men in dark suits checked guest lists. Women from the styling team carried garment bags and makeup cases upstairs for Amaka and the female relatives. By sunset, the mansion looked less like a home than a kingdom preparing for judgment. Decker had been assigned to tray service in the West Reception Hall. Of course. After breakfast and the records room, she knew this was no coincidence. Someone wanted her visible tonight, close enough to be watched, close enough to be humiliated if the chance appeared. Mama Ife found her in the silver pantry just before the guests started arriving. The older woman moved more slowly than usual, her hands unsteady as she adjusted the folded napkins on Decker's tray. "You should keep your head down tonight," Mama Ife murmured. Decker glanced at her. "Is that possible in this house?" "No." Mama Ife gave a sad, tired smile. "But sometimes pretending saves a life." Decker lowered her voice. "Mama Ife, how long have you known Madzi Bako?" The older woman's fingers stopped moving. Too quickly. That hesitation told Decker more than words. Mama Ife resumed folding. "Long enough to know he does not forget disrespect." Did he ever work closely with Madame Deka? Asked carefully, meaning Tade's late mother. Mama Ife did not answer at once. In the hallway outside, voices drifted by, bright and artificial. Laughter from guests who had not yet entered the hall, glass clinking, shoes on marble. Then Mama Ife said very softly, "There were many things in this house before your time, child. Some were tragedies. Some were decisions dressed as tragedies." Deka's breath caught. Before she could ask more, a younger maid rushed in. "They're coming down! Amaka Madam is furious about the seating cards." Mama Ife stepped back at once. The moment was gone. "Go," she whispered. Deka lifted the tray and moved into the reception hall. The room was breathtaking in the way expensive things often were, beautiful enough to distract from the cruelty used to build them. Crystal chandeliers poured warm gold over polished floors. Tall windows reflected the city lights beyond the estate gates. A live string quartet played near the far wall. Business magnates, politicians, and investors drifted in clusters beneath arrangements of white flowers, their voices smooth, their smiles strategic. Everywhere Deka looked, she saw performance. Performance of status. Performance of marriage. Performance of loyalty. At the center of it all stood Tade Okoye, in a black, tailored suit, greeting guests with controlled courtesy. He looked exactly like the version the newspapers adored, commanding disciplined untouchable. Only someone watching closely would have seen the strain beneath that perfection, the tightness in his jaw, the way his eyes kept scanning the room as though expecting a hidden strike. Amaka stood near him in a fitted emerald gown that made her look regal and cold. She rested one hand lightly on his arm, smiling for the guests. But Deka saw the truth in every small motion. The possessiveness, the calculation, the anger not yet spent from breakfast. Deka kept moving, offering champagne, sparkling water, and small plated starters. Most guests did not look at her face. They looked through her. A few did worse. One middle-aged businessman laughed while taking a glass and asked another guest whether the Okoye household had started hiring beauty queens for domestic labor now. The second man chuckled. A woman in diamonds gave Deka a slow, dismissive glance and asked for a fresh napkin without saying thank you. It was the old lesson again. Wealth did not always shout. Often it humiliated by acting as though your humanity was too small to deserve notice. Deka endured it in silence. Not because she was weak, because she was listening. Snatches of conversation drifted around her as she moved. Board vote next month. Bako has stronger numbers than people think. Amaka's family wants the merger sealed before quarter close. Tade is distracted. Distracted. Deka nearly laughed at the word. Men who plotted around power always called morality a distraction when it interfered with theft. Half an hour into the reception, Amaka snapped her fingers from across the room. Not at another socialite. Not at a coordinator. At Deka. The gesture was small but deliberate, designed to remind everyone watching exactly where Deka stood. Deka crossed the room with the tray balanced steadily. Madame Amaka smiled for the nearby guests before speaking through her teeth. "The private lounge is short on champagne. Take this in." She handed Deka an unopened bottle. Deka accepted it. "Yes, madam." As she turned, Amaka's voice stopped her again. "And be careful. The guests in there are more important than the ones out here. I would hate for you to embarrass yourself." Several nearby women smiled into their glasses. Deka kept walking. The private lounge was smaller, quieter, and occupied by the kind of men who preferred making decisions away from witnesses. Chief Naji stood near the fireplace with two directors from the company. Mazibako was there too, broad-shouldered and dignified in a traditional dark agbada with gold embroidery, every inch the respected elder. And on his cuffs, nothing. No cufflinks. Deka's hidden pocket seemed to burn against her hip. He turned as she entered, and his eyes landed on her with unnerving calm. No surprise, No guilt. Just the measured attention of a man checking whether a trap had begun to close. "Champagne," Decca said quietly. Chief Nanaji waved without looking at her. "Leave it there." As she moved toward the side table, she heard Mazibako say, "Young people are too eager these days. They mistake noise for courage." One of the directors chuckled. "And sometimes they are encouraged." Bako's gaze did not leave Decca. "Encouragement is expensive. So are consequences." A chill moved up her spine. He knew. He wanted her to know that he knew. She set down the bottle and turned to leave, but Chief Naji spoke again. "What is the new girl's name?" No one answered at first. Then Bako said, "Decca, I believe." The way he said it made her skin tighten. Chief Naji finally looked at her. Pretty face, dangerous habit of being noticed. Decca forced herself to keep her tone neutral. "Excuse me, sir." When she stepped back into the main hall, the string quartet had shifted to slower music. More guests had arrived. The room was fuller now, louder. Cameras flashed near the entrance as a local business magazine photographer captured the evening. And then, right on cue, the next humiliation came. Amaka touched her throat and frowned theatrically. "My bracelet." Tede glanced down. "What about it?" "It's gone." The nearest guests turned at once. Amaka gave a distressed laugh. "That's strange. I was just wearing it." One of her friends gasped. "The diamond one?" "Yes." The circle around them widened. Decca felt the air change before anyone said her name. Amaka turned slowly as though only just thinking of it. "The last person who came near me was the maid." There it was. Simple, elegant, cruel. A whisper ran through the guests. Tede's face hardened. "Amaka, what she said all innocence now. I'm not accusing anyone. I'm saying facts." She adjusted the tray near me. Then I noticed it was missing. A security man stepped forward. Decca stood very still. Not fear now. Anger. Not because she had not expected this, because Amaka was too polished to dirty her own hands. She wanted other people to perform the ugliness for her. One of the female guests murmured loudly enough to be heard. "These things happen when standards are lowered." Decca turned toward Amaka. "May I speak?" Several people looked offended that she had a voice at all. Amaka tilted her head. "This should be interesting." Decca set down the tray. "You may search me." A murmur. "Bold. Too bold." Amaka's smile sharpened. "Very well." Before the security woman could step in, Decca added, "But after that the room should also be checked." "And the path Madam took since entering the hall." Amaka's eyes cooled. "Why? Because if your bracelet truly disappeared tonight, it did not leave on my body." Tade looked at her then with that same unsettling focus from breakfast. "Explain," he said. Decca pointed not at Amaka, but toward the silk shawl draped over the back of a nearby decorative chair. "You kept touching your wrist," she said. "Not because the bracelet was gone, because the clasp was loose and scratching you. You removed it before calling attention to it." Amaka's expression flickered. "Only once. Enough." Decca continued, her voice steady now. "And when you called me over earlier, you stood beside that chair. If you wanted the room to think I took it, you needed the bracelet to be discovered somewhere close enough to create doubt, but not on you." A wave of tension passed through the hall. Tade walked to the chair himself. He lifted the shawl. Something bright slipped free and landed on the cushion. The diamond bracelet. Gasps broke across the room. For one suspended second, no one moved. Then Tard turned back toward Amaka, his expression cold enough to freeze breath. And for the first time that night, even the rich looked uncomfortable. No one in the reception hall seemed to remember how to breathe. The bracelet lay across the pale silk cushion, like a blade left in public view. It glittered beneath the chandeliers, beautiful and vicious, no longer jewelry but evidence. Around it, the polished world of investors, wives, politicians, and smiling opportunists wavered for one raw second. Then the whispers began. Soft at first, then multiplying. Amaka did not move. Her face remained lifted, elegant, controlled, but Decca saw the tiny tremor in her fingers before Amaka folded her hands together to hide it. It was the first real crack Decca had witnessed in the woman's poise. Tede's voice cut through the room. "Everyone out!" The words were not loud. They did not need to be. The quartet stopped playing mid-note. A tray nearly slipped from another maid's hand. Guests looked at one another, uncertain whether they had actually been dismissed. Then Chief Naji cleared his throat, muttered something about fresh air, and started toward the terrace. Others followed quickly. No one wanted to be visibly attached to the moment if it turned uglier. Within a minute, the center of the hall had emptied, leaving only a few senior staff, 2 security men by the doors, Amaka Tade and Decca. The silence that followed was harsher than the crowd noise had been. Amaka smiled first. It was a remarkable thing to witness. Some people cried when cornered. Some shouted. Amaka arranged her face into wounded grace. "So this is what we are doing now?" she asked. "Humiliating me because a bracelet slipped from my hand." Tade did not answer immediately. His gaze moved from the bracelet to the chair, then to Decca, then finally to Amaka. "You accused an employee of theft." Amaka laughed softly. "I said she was the last person near me. You implied enough. She is a maid in a crowded room, Tad. We both know these things must be checked quickly before gossip spreads." Decca almost admired the audacity. Amaka had not denied setting the trap. She had simply rearranged its shape and offered everyone a more convenient lie. Tade bent, picked up the bracelet, and held it in his palm. "You claimed it was missing." It was Amaka replied smoothly. "Then it wasn't." The reply would have sounded absurd in any ordinary house, but in the Okoye mansion, truth was so often smothered in etiquette that absurdity could survive if dressed well enough. Tade's expression did not change. "Leave." Amaka blinked once. "What, the reception is over for you tonight?" A flash of genuine anger crossed her face at last. "You cannot be serious." "I am very serious." For the first time since the guests had entered, Tade sounded less like a social host and more like the man the business pages feared. Precise, merciless, bored by excuses. Amaka stepped closer to him, lowering her voice. "Over a maid. In front of your board, in front of people who already believe you are unstable." Decca felt the words hit the air like a hidden knife. So this was the deeper wound. Not jealousy alone, not class cruelty alone. There were politics beneath the engagement pressure, beneath the appearances. Tade's eyes sharpened. "Leave Amaka." She looked at him for another second, then at Decca. The hatred in that look was so pure, it almost felt clean. "This is not finished," she said quietly. Then she turned, gathered the silk of her dress in one hand, and walked out of the hall with all the dignity of a queen, refusing to acknowledge blood on the floor. When she was gone, one of the security men asked, "Sir, shall we resume the event?" Tade slipped the bracelet into his pocket. "No. Tell the guests the evening is concluded." The guard nodded and left. Mama Ife appeared at the doorway, worried and pale. Tade dismissed her too. Soon only he and Decca remained in the huge reception hall, surrounded by flowers, abandoned glasses, and the expensive silence left behind when rich people fled discomfort. Decca stood where she was, hands clasped behind her back, so he would not see how tightly they were shaking, now that the moment had passed. Tade looked at her, not casually, not like a man looking at staff. He studied her as if she were both a solution and a complication. "You keep surviving traps that should have buried you," he said. Decca answered carefully. Maybe because I've seen traps before. That is not a normal answer. Neither is your house. A corner of his mouth almost moved. Not a smile. Something more dangerous. Recognition. Come with me, he said. He turned before she could respond. Decker hesitated only half a second, then followed him out of the reception hall through the east corridor and into a private study lined with dark wood and low golden light. The room smelled of leather paper and rain pressing faintly against the far windows. This was not the grand library where guests could be impressed. This room was smaller, more guarded, used by someone who worked, not someone who performed. Tadej closed the door behind them. The sound made Decker's pulse jump. He crossed to the desk, but did not sit. Instead, he loosened his cuffs, set the bracelet aside, and faced her. Who are you really? The question landed without decoration. Decker lifted her chin. I'm Decker. That is your name. It is not an answer. She stayed silent. Tadej watched her for a moment, then continued. You noticed the chair placement at breakfast. You saw through Amaka's bracelet stunt in seconds. You have been near private records you were not assigned to, and you look at this house as if it owes you something. His voice was calm, but each sentence struck with precision. What do you want? He asked. The safest reply would have been money. Many people expected the poor to be simple in their needs because that made them easier to dismiss. Decker chose a different truth. Justice. The room went still. Tadej's eyes narrowed slightly. For what? My mother. There. It was out. A small part of her regretted it instantly. Not because it was false, because truth once released could not be recalled. Tade did not react the way she expected. No confusion, no immediate denial, only a deeper, more focused stillness. What is your mother's name? Decker hesitated. If she spoke too much, too soon, she could destroy everything. If she spoke too little, she could lose the chance entirely. Mama Sadeh, she said at last. Something unreadable moved across his face. Not recognition exactly, but impact. He turned away from her, walked to the window, and stood with one hand in his pocket. The city lights beyond the estate walls burned faintly through the dark. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. Did she send you here? No. Does she know you came? Decker swallowed. Not fully. That part was true. Mama Sadeh had never given permission. She had begged Decker for years to stop asking about the Okoye family. Stop digging. Stop remembering. Fear had lived in that plea. Tadej nodded once, as if filing the answer away. And yet you came into my house anyway. Yes. Why? Because sick people speak differently when they think death is near. Decker said quietly. Because my mother kept apologizing to someone she never named, because she whispered your family's name like it was a wound, and because poor people do not spend years being afraid of rich houses for no reason. Teddy turned back to her. No anger now, only an intensity that made the air feel thinner. You are either reckless, he said, or very certain. Maybe both. This time the near smile did come brief and tired gone before it could soften him. Then he crossed the room, opened a locked drawer in the desk and removed a thin folder. He did not hand it to her. He only held it loosely against the desk as though weighing whether she had earned even this much. You are not the only person in this house looking for truth, he said. Decker stared at him. The sentence changed everything. He continued, for years I was told my mother died of complications during treatment. I accepted that because grief makes obedient fools of people. Later things stopped aligning. Missing records, missing staff, contradictory accounts, financial movements no one could explain cleanly. He tapped the folder once, and yet every path I followed was blocked from inside the family before it could reach daylight. Decker felt her heart beat quicken. So he knew? Not everything. but enough. You suspect Mazibako, she said. Tade's gaze did not shift. I suspect many people. My uncle is simply one of the few old enough to have benefited from my mother's silence and my father's collapse. Decca's hidden pocket seemed to burn again where the silver cufflink rested. She drew a breath. Then I have something you need to see. Slowly, without breaking eye contact, she reached into the lining of her apron and brought out the wrapped dust cloth. She unfolded it carefully and placed the cufflink on the desk between them. Tade looked down. His expression changed at once. Not dramatically, but enough. You know it, Decca said. Yes, he answered. Is it his? It is from a set commissioned for my uncle 10 years ago. The room seemed to contract around them. I found it outside the records room, Decca said, after someone watched me search the old employment file. Tade's jaw tightened. What did you find? Decca held his gaze. A replaced name. My mother's. Silence. Rain finally touched the windows, soft at first, then steadier. Neither of them moved. At last, Tade spoke. Listen carefully, Decca. From this moment, if my uncle knows you are searching, then you are no longer merely inconvenient. You are a threat. Decca's throat tightened, but she kept her face steady. I already knew that. No, Tade said. You knew you were in danger. That is not the same thing. In this house, danger can still be accidental. A threat is hunted. The words landed with terrible clarity. He leaned one hand on the desk, closer now, his voice lower. So here is what happens next. You stay in this house. You say nothing to anyone, not Mama Ife, not the kitchen staff, not your mother if she calls. You do exactly as instructed, and from tonight onward, you report directly to me. Decca stared at him. This was not kindness. It was stranger than kindness, a proposition built from necessity. Why, she asked. Teda held her gaze. Because someone in my family murdered the truth before. And if we move badly now, they will do worse than that. He straightened, then added the sentence that changed the ground beneath her feet. Help me find out who destroyed my mother's life, and I will make sure your mother lives long enough to tell us why. For the rest of that night, Decca could not decide which frightened her more, that Tade believed her, or that he had spoken as though war had already begun. The rain deepened over the estate, whispering against the long windows of the east wing, and sliding down the glass in silver streaks. By midnight, the reception flowers had begun to smell too sweet, almost rotten, beneath the perfume of wealth. Servants cleared abandoned glasses and folded table linen in exhausted silence. No one mentioned Amaka's disgrace aloud. In the Okie mansion, scandal did not disappear. It was simply wrapped in better fabric by morning. Decca was sent to a small room at the end of the staff corridor near the upper hall, a clear sign that Tade meant what he had said. She was being kept closer now, not promoted, not trusted fully, but repositioned, watched, protected, used, perhaps all three at once. She sat on the narrow bed without removing her shoes, replaying the study conversation again and again. Her mother's name, the cufflink, the old records, the way Tade had not looked shocked when she said Mama Sade had been in this house years ago. More than once Decca nearly rose and ran to the service gate. Every instinct she had learned while surviving poverty told her that wealthy people never invited the poor into their secrets unless they were preparing to bury them inside. But then she thought of Mama Sade lying in the public hospital thinner each month, her hands trembling even while trying to smile. She thought of fevered whispers in the night, of apologies to no one visible, of the way her mother always went silent when the name Okoye was spoken. No, leaving now would not save them. It would only leave the truth in the hands of people who had already spent years murdering it. Just before dawn, Decca finally slept. She woke less than 3 hours later to pounding on the door. Decca Abeni's voice cracked with urgency. Wake up. There's a call for you. Decker sat upright instantly. Calls never came to the upper staff corridor unless something was wrong. She pulled on her shoes properly and hurried after a beanie to the service office near the back kitchen, where an old landline sat beside the duty ledger. Mama Ife stood there, wringing her hands. "It's the hospital," the older woman said. Everything inside Decker dropped. She grabbed the receiver. "Hello." A tired nurse answered in clipped, overworked tones. "Are you the daughter of Mrs. Sadeh Ibrahim?" "Yes. What happened?" Her breathing worsened during the night. "We stabilized her, but the attending doctor says she needs transfer and private medication immediately if you want to avoid another collapse." Decker closed her eyes. Money. Always money standing between life and mercy. "I'm coming," she said. "She's asking for you," the nurse added. "Please hurry." Decker replaced the receiver with shaking fingers. Mama Ife stepped forward. "Go! I'll speak to—" "No," said a voice from the doorway. "Tade." He had appeared so quietly none of them had heard him approach. He stood in a plain, dark shirt instead of his usual suit, as though he had dressed fast and with little sleep. His eyes moved once over Decker's face and took in everything. "The car is ready," he said. Decker stared at him. "You arranged a car. I arranged it last night, in case this happened." That answer unsettled her in a different way. He had expected escalation. He had expected the family to move faster than grief. Abeni and Mama Ife lowered their heads and left without another word. Decker remained frozen for half a second. Pride rose in her throat, useless and bitter. "I didn't ask for charity." Or Tade's expression hardened slightly. "Good, because this isn't charity. It's strategy. If your mother is a witness, she becomes priority." The bluntness should have offended her. Instead, it steadied her. "Fine. Let him call it strategy." Breath was breath. Survival was survival. They drove through Lagos in grey morning light beneath low clouds and damp streets. The city was already awake, buses coughing, smoke hawkers lifting their voices, office workers stepping around puddles in pressed clothes that would be wrinkled by noon. Decker sat in the back seat of the black sedan, hands clenched so tightly they ached. Tade sat beside her, not speaking, not pretending, comfort simply there, like a blade resting flat. At the hospital entrance, he made one call before they even stepped out. Within minutes, an administrator who had ignored Decker twice in past weeks suddenly became efficient, respectful, eager. Forms appeared. A porter brought a wheelchair. A specialist was summoned. Decker watched it happen with a kind of sick rage. So this was what power did. It did not create compassion. It created speed. They found Mama Sadeh in a narrow ward behind a curtain that did not fully close. Her skin looked grayer than Decker had ever seen it. Sweat darkened the scarf around her hairline. The oxygen line at her nose only made her seem more fragile. But when she saw Decker, she tried to smile. "My stubborn girl," she whispered. Decker knelt beside the bed at once. "I'm here, Mama." Mama Sadeh's gaze shifted past her and found Tade. The change was immediate. Fear flooded her face so nakedly that even Tade, who had probably been feared by half the city, seemed struck by it. "No," Mama Sadeh breathed. "No, no!" Decker caught her hand. "Mama, listen to me. He didn't come to hurt you." Mama Sadeh tried to pull her hand away. "You brought him here. I had no choice." "Yes, you did." The older woman's voice broke into a ragged cough. "You should have stayed away from that house. I told you to let the dead remain with God." Tade took one step back instead of forward. That small restraint mattered more than any soft word could have. His voice when he spoke was low and controlled. "Mrs. Saad, I'm not here for revenge." She laughed once, a terrible dry sound. Rich men always say that before they ruin what little is left. Decker's chest tightened. She had imagined this moment differently. Not peaceful, never easy, but not this raw collision of fear and unfinished history. A doctor entered with the administrator and explained that Mama Sade needed a monitored private room immediately if they wanted to stabilize her oxygen and begin the more expensive medication cycle. Tade signed the transfer papers before Decker could even process the amount listed. Again the same bitter lesson, where Decker had begged, Tade only signed. Within an hour, Mama Sade had been moved upstairs into a cleaner room with one window, proper monitoring equipment, and a door that shut fully. Rain streaked the glass outside. The city beyond looked blurred and far away. For a while, Mama Sade slept under sedation. Tade remained in the hall, taking calls he kept short and quiet. Decker sat by the bed, rubbing her mother's hand, trying to force warmth back into fingers that had worked too hard for too many years. When Mama Sade woke again, near midday, the room felt smaller. She did not ask where they were. She already knew from the sheets, the machine, the absence of chaos. She knew someone powerful had intervened, and she hated it. "You should not trust him," she murmured, eyes still closed. Decker said nothing. Mama Sade opened them slowly. "Does he know?" "Some of it." "How much?" "That you worked in the Okoye house, that your name was replaced in the old records, that something happened before his mother died." Tears gathered at the edges of Mama Sade's eyes. "Oh, God." Decker leaned closer. "Mama, please. I need the truth now. Not pieces, not fear. The truth." For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft hiss of oxygen and the distant rumble of rain. Then Mama Sade whispered, "There was a woman in that house who did not deserve to die." Tade entered quietly behind Decker, but stopped near the door, saying nothing. Mama Sade saw him, and nearly shut down again, but Decker tightened her hold gently. "Please." The older woman's lips trembled. "Your mother," she said to Tade. "She was kind to people she did not need. That was her mistake." Tade did not move. Mama Sade continued, voice uneven. "The week before she died, she became frightened. Not weak frightened. She asked questions about documents, property papers, share transfers, something to do with your father's signature." Her breath hitched. She said the numbers had changed. She said someone inside the family was moving things before she was buried. Decker felt ice slide under her skin. Tade's face became unreadable again, but not calm. More like stone around fire. "Who?" he asked. Mama Sade squeezed her eyes shut. "I did not see everything. I was not supposed to be there. I was only bringing tea outside the study when I heard shouting." "What shouting?" Tade asked. "Your mother and Mazi Bako." The room seemed to contract. Decker turned slowly toward Tade. He had expected his uncle's name, maybe. But hearing it from a living witness was different. It made suspicion breathe. Mama Sade's voice broke. She said she would not let him steal from her children. She said she would expose him for what Tade's tone sharpened despite himself. For changing documents after your father started drinking and collapsing. Mama Sade coughed hard, then pressed a shaking hand to her ribs. There were papers on the desk. Seals. Bank copies. She told him she had already made duplicates. Decker stared. Duplicates. Hope rose for one dangerous second. "If she made copies?" Decker said quickly. "Where are they?" Mama Sade's face crumpled. "I don't know. I swear I don't know." Tade stepped closer at last, slow enough not to startle her. What happened after the argument? Mama Sade looked at him with a fear so old it had become part of her bones. "Your mother saw me in the corridor. She knew I had heard. She pulled me into her sitting room and told me if anything happened to her I should take one envelope and leave the house." Decker's breath caught. "An envelope," Mama Sade nodded weakly. "A brown envelope. Hidden inside the linen chest in the blue room beside her private bedroom. She told me not to trust anyone, not even family." Tade's jaw tightened. Did you take it? A terrible silence followed. Then Mama Sade began to cry. Not loudly, not dramatically, quietly like someone who had carried a stone for too many years and could no longer pretend it weighed nothing. I tried, she whispered, but I was too late. Decca felt dread spread through her limbs. What do you mean? Mama Sade looked at her daughter, then at Tade. Shame flooded every line of her face. When I returned that night, the blue room had already been searched. The linen chest was open, and Mazi Bako was there. Neither Decca nor Tade spoke. Mama Sade's next words came in fragments. He smiled at me. Smiled. Then he asked whether poor girls understood what happened to thieves and liars in rich houses. Her hand shook violently in Decca's. The next morning your mother was dead. By evening my name was gone from the staff ledger. And before sunrise, the day after that, someone followed me all the way to the bus park. The monitor beside the bed began to beep faster. Decca rose halfway, panicked. Mama Sade grabbed her wrist with surprising strength. I ran, she said. I ran, and I never stopped. That is why I forbade you. That is why I stayed poor and silent and sick before I went back near that family. Because I knew what powerful men do when servants carry truth. Her eyes shifted once more to Tad, and with the last of her strength, she whispered the sentence that changed the stakes yet again. He did not only steal from your mother, he tried to poison her before she died. The words hung in the hospital room long after Mama Sade lost the strength to repeat them. He did not only steal from your mother, he tried to poison her before she died. For one suspended second, the machines kept beeping, the rain kept tapping against the window, and yet none of it felt real. Decca stood beside the bed with her mother's trembling hand locked in hers, while Tade remained near the foot of the bed, as still as a man turned to stone. Then the doctor rushed in. 2 nurses followed, efficient and fast, their movements sharpened by long practice. Mama Sade's breathing had become ragged again. Her pulse climbed. The monitor flashed warnings. Decca was gently but firmly moved aside while the nurses adjusted oxygen flow and checked her pressure. Please wait outside, the doctor said. Decca did not want to let go. She only did when Mama Sade herself gave the faintest squeeze, as if telling her to survive this next moment by stepping back. In the hallway, the fluorescent lights were too bright. The smell of disinfectant clawed at Decca's throat. She pressed both hands over her mouth, trying to keep herself from breaking apart right there against the wall. Tade stood a few feet away, staring through the glass panel of the closed door. His face was unreadable again. But now Decca knew better than to mistake unreadable for untouched. She told you, Decca whispered. Now you know. He did not answer at once. When he finally spoke, his voice was low enough that another person passing down the corridor might have missed it. I have known for years that my mother did not die cleanly. Decca turned toward him sharply. What? His eyes remained fixed on the hospital room. I did not know poison. I did not know your mother heard the argument. I did not know about the envelope. He paused. But I knew enough to stop believing the official story a long time ago. Anger flared through Decca, hot and immediate. You knew enough, she said, and still let those people stay in your house. Now he looked at her. And you think I should have done what he asked? Accuse a man with no proof. Start a public war against my own family based on fragments and fear. My father was half alive in those years. The board was split. The estate lawyers were bought. Every door I pushed against closed from the inside. His tone remained controlled, but anger lived under it now, too. Decca shook her head. So everyone just moved on, no? His jaw tightened. Some of us learned to survive first. That answer hit harder because part of her understood it. Survival had ruled her life, too. Poverty did not give people the luxury of dramatic truth at the right moment. It trained them to wait, hide, endure, calculate. To eat humiliation and call it patience until the day a crack finally opened. The doctor came out 20 minutes later. "She is stable again," he said, "but only just. She needs rest. No more questioning today." Decker nodded quickly. Tade asked, "Can she be protected here?" The doctor hesitated. That hesitation was enough. Protected. Not treated. Protected. Hospitals in Lagos heard many things. Rich names traveled through corridors faster than medicine. Tade understood the same thing at once. He turned to Decker. "We're leaving. The doctor just said she needs rest. She needs a safer room than one that can be reached by anyone with cash and a smile." The doctor opened his mouth perhaps to object, then closed it. That too told Decker enough. By sunset, Mama Sade had been transferred again, this time to a private recovery suite inside a discreet clinic owned through one of Todd's business holdings. Decker hated how naturally he could move systems. A call, a signature, a vehicle, a guarded room. Things she had begged heaven for as a child appeared before him like furniture being rearranged. But hatred and gratitude were becoming tangled now, and that was almost worse. 2 armed security men in plain clothes took posts outside the clinic suite. Tade gave instructions himself. No visitors without his approval. No disclosure of patient identity. No access to records except through one senior physician. When he returned from the nurse's station, Decker was standing by the window in the small waiting room, arms wrapped tightly around herself. "This is bigger than I thought," she said. "Yes." "That means Beko already knows my mother spoke." "Probably," she turned. "Then he'll come after her again. He'll try." The certainty in Todd's voice made her stomach knot, not because he sounded afraid, because he sounded experienced. Decker stared at him. "How many times has he done this?" Tade did not answer directly. Enough that people around him learned silence was cheaper. They left the clinic after dark in separate cars to avoid drawing attention. Tade insisted Decker return to the mansion with him. On the drive back, Lagos glowed and roared around them. Traffic lights, food stands, motorcycles slicing through lanes, churches still open, bars opening wider, men in pressed shirts, bargaining under neon signs, women carrying baskets home under street lamps. Life everywhere, noise everywhere. And yet Decker felt sealed inside a smaller world now, one ruled by dead women, altered documents, and men who smiled while poisoning the truth. When they entered the Okoye estate, the mansion seemed almost too quiet. No reception music now, no arriving guests, no false glamour, only security lights, trimmed hedges dark with rainwater, and the hush of servants who sensed something had shifted without knowing exactly what. In the east study, Tade shut the door and placed a file on the desk between them. "The board meets tomorrow morning," he said. Decker frowned. "What board?" "The Emergency Governance Committee first, then the wider directors if needed. And Bako intends to use Amaka's humiliation at the reception as leverage." Decker stared. "How he'll frame it as evidence I'm compromised, distracted, unfit to handle a merger negotiation, emotionally unstable because of a maid." The word tasted disgusting in the room now smaller than truth. Decker stepped closer to the desk. "Then don't let him control the story." Tade's gaze flicked up to hers. "That is exactly what I intend." He opened the file. Inside were printouts of financial transfers, meeting notices, share, vote projections, and photographs of signatures. Some pages carried sticky tabs and handwritten notes. Others looked older, copied from archives. Decker moved around the desk without being invited. This time he did not stop her. She scanned the top page and frowned. "These transfers are all from after Madam died." "Yes, but the ownership shift started before that." Tade looked at her sharply. Decker tapped a column. "This shell vendor name. It repeats later under a different company, but the banking route is too similar. People who steal from institutions often change labels, not habits." A long pause. "Where did you learn that?" he asked. She gave him a flat look. "Poor people notice patterns because no one explains the rules to us. We survive by watching." Something in his expression shifted again. Respect, perhaps, or the dangerous beginning of it. He slid another document toward her. "Tomorrow, Bako will try to force a temporary authority vote. If he wins, he gets internal access to everything. He can bury more records before we reach them." "Then you need to hit him first," Decker said, with what Tade asked. Suspicion with proof that he has already manipulated documents and intimidated witnesses. He leaned back slightly. "My mother is not strong enough to testify publicly. The cufflink proves proximity not a crime, and whatever was in the envelope is still missing." Decker stared at the desk, mind moving fast. Then she remembered something. "Mama Sade said your mother argued with Bako over papers in the study." "Yes. She said there were duplicates." "Yes." "Then Bako didn't just steal money, he was afraid of copies." Tade said nothing. Decker continued more quickly now. "If someone steals originals, copies are the real threat. Rich people hide money in banks. But women hiding from rich men hide things where men like that don't look twice." Tade's eyes narrowed. Meaning maybe the envelope was never the only copy. The room went still. Decker thought back to the portrait, the erased figure, the locked room, the corridor no servant wanted to discuss. A woman facing betrayal from inside her own family would not rely on a single hiding place. Not if she was intelligent, not if she knew she was already under attack. Your mother had a private bedroom, a blue sitting room, and that locked room nobody enters, Decker said. "What is the locked room?" Tade's expression hardened by a degree. "Her old suite." Decker felt her pulse jump. "The locked room is your mother's." "Yes." "Then why is it sealed?" "Because after she died, my father ordered it closed. No one was allowed to disturb anything." "Did that include Bako?" A flicker crossed his face. No answer was answer enough. Decker straightened. "We need to search it tonight." Tade was quiet for several seconds. Rain touched the windows again, softer now. Somewhere deeper in the mansion, a clock chimed the hour. "Tonight is risky," he said. "So is waiting until morning while Bako prepares to strip you in a boardroom." His gaze locked on hers. There it was again, the same force that had filled the dining hall on her first day. But now it no longer felt like standing before a master. It felt like facing an ally neither of them had chosen, but both needed. At last he said, "If we search that room and find nothing, we lose time I need for the board. If we don't search it and the answer is there, you lose more than time." Another beat. Then Tad nodded once. "Fine." He crossed to the far wall where a built-in cabinet stood, disguised inside the woodwork. From a locked drawer, he removed a ring of old keys, selected one heavy brass key, and held it in his palm for a second longer than necessary. Decker watched him carefully. "You've never gone in?" "Not since the funeral." "Why?" He gave a humorless half-smile. "Because grief makes cowards, too." That honesty startled her more than anger would have. They left the study without alerting any staff. Tad dismissed the corridor guard with a simple instruction about checking the rear gate, then led Decker down the east wing toward the old sealed room. The corridor was darker at night, quieter, almost reverent. Portraits watched from the walls. Carpet softened every step. At the far end waited the same door Decker had seen on her second day, dark wood brass handle silence packed into its frame. Tade stopped before it. For the first time since she had known him, he looked uncertain. Not weak, wounded. He inserted the key. The lock resisted at first, then turned with a deep metallic click that seemed to echo through the hall. When the door opened, a rush of stale air drifted out, carrying dust cedar and the faint ghost of an old perfume. The room beyond was dark, untouched. And somewhere inside that darkness, something metallic glinted once, small, deliberate, and out of place. Decker stepped forward, then froze, because from behind them, at the far end of the corridor, came the sound of slow applause. The applause came slowly, deliberately, each clap spaced just far enough apart to feel insulting. Decker and Tade turned at the same time. At the far end of the corridor, beneath a wall, sconce throwing warm light over polished wood, stood Madzi Bako. He was not alone. Amaka stood beside him in a wine-colored dress, her arms folded, her expression cool and almost amused. Two security men remained half a step behind them. Not official estate guards, Decker noticed immediately, but men in dark civilian suits with the stillness of hired force. For one suspended second, no one moved. Then Bako smiled. "What a touching sight," he said. A son returning to his mother's room at midnight, guided by a maid. The last word was not spoken loudly. It was sharpened. Tade did not step away from the open door. "You're out late." Bako's smile widened faintly. "And you are trespassing on grief that your father ordered preserved. My father is not the one who concerns me tonight." "No," Bako said, gaze shifting to Decker. "I can see that." Decker felt the meaning under the words at once. Bako was not merely mocking Ted. He was reshaping the scene before it could become dangerous to him. If he could turn this into a story about impropriety, instability, obsession, anything but evidence, then even discovery could be diluted before sunrise. Amaka spoke next, her tone almost gentle. "This is becoming a pattern, Tade. First the reception, now sneaking around the house in the middle of the night with a servant." "What exactly am I supposed to tell people?" Decker's jaw tightened. "Tell people. Always the performance. Always the audience." Even now, when the air itself felt thick with old betrayal, Amaka's instinct was not truth, but narrative. Tade's voice stayed cold. "You can begin by telling them to mind their own business." Bako gave a soft chuckle. "You see, this is what I have been trying to prevent. Emotion, disorder, household scandal seeping into corporate judgment." He took 2 measured steps closer. "You have an emergency committee at 10 in the morning," he continued. "The board is already nervous. One more careless scene, and even those still loyal to you may decide the company needs calmer hands. The threat was elegant, expensive, and naked." Decker understood then that this confrontation had likely been engineered the moment Bako learned Mama Sade was moved. Whether through hospital whispers, paid staff, or private surveillance, he had followed the line of danger straight back to the house. And now, here he was, not panicked, but prepared. That meant he still believed he controlled the board, which meant whatever he feared inside this room had either been removed long ago or he had not had enough time to remove everything. Tade held the brass key in one hand. "If you came here to warn me, you've finished." Bako's eyes flicked to the open doorway behind him. "On the contrary, I came to stop you from making another childish mistake." Amaka tilted her head slightly. "Or perhaps to stop her from making it for you." All eyes shifted to Decker. There it was again, the attempt to reduce her, isolate her, make her appear as the corrupting influence instead of the witness. Decker felt the pressure of it like heat against her skin. This was how people like Amaka and Bako survived. They did not always crush truth directly. They stained it first. Tade moved just enough to place himself more fully between Decker and them. The gesture was small. It changed everything. Bako noticed too. His smile vanished. So he said quietly, "It has gone this far." Decker saw the shift in the old man then. Not open rage. Something harder. The instant a manipulator realizes one of his tools no longer works and begins calculating which blade to pick up instead. He nodded toward the doorway. "Close the room, Tade. Go to bed. Present yourself properly tomorrow. Let the adults handle the business of this family." Tade's face hardened. "You forfeited the right to use that word years ago." A thin silence followed. Even Amaka looked at Bako then, just once, measuring the blow. Bako exhaled through his nose. "Be careful." "Is that concern?" Tade asked. No, Bako replied. "Experience. Men who let sentiment guide them usually find themselves kneeling before consequences." Deka felt her hidden fear sharpen into anger again. He talked about consequences the way priests talked about weather, as though ruin were merely a natural event and not a thing men like him chose to create. She stepped slightly around Tade before caution could stop her. Then maybe she said some men spend too long confusing fear with respect. The corridor went silent. Amaka stared as if Deka had slapped royalty in public. Bako's eyes landed on her fully now, and for the first time, Deka saw past the polished elder, the respected uncle, the cultivated dignity. There was rot there, old and patient. "Your mother should have taught you silence better," he said. The words hit like a blade. Tade moved instantly. Enough. But the damage was done, because beneath the insult was confirmation. Bako knew exactly who Deka's mother was. He was no longer bothering to pretend otherwise. Deka's blood ran cold. Tade had heard it too. She saw it in the sudden deadly stillness that entered him. Bako seemed to realize a fraction too late that he had said too much. His expression did not change, but he shifted tactics immediately. "This girl is using her mother's sickness to manipulate you," he said to Tad. "That is what this really is. A frightened servant's family invents history, and you already vulnerable choose to believe it because it flatters your resentment." Amaka stepped in smoothly. "Tade, listen to yourself. Since she arrived, there has been chaos every single day. Accusations, missing records, public scenes. Is that coincidence? Or exactly what someone wanted?" Deka turned toward him. This was the real attack. Not on her, on trust. Strip away evidence, and what remained was always the human question, who poisoned whom first with lies. For one terrible second, Tade said nothing. Deka felt it like a blow, not because she thought he fully doubted her, because silence at the wrong moment could still kill. Then he looked at Bako and said, "Leave this corridor." Bako's mouth flattened. "You are making a grave error." "I said leave." The security men behind Bako shifted subtly, waiting. Amaka's voice cooled. "You would choose her over your family," Tade answered without looking at her. "What I choose is truth. You should both find that less surprising than you do." The insult landed cleanly. Bako held his gaze for several seconds more. Then slowly he gave one short nod. "Very well," he said. "Search the room. Tear the house apart if you wish. But remember, this nephew by mourning boards do not vote on grief. They vote on stability." He turned. Amaka lingered a moment longer, eyes moving from Tade to Deka and back again. Whatever humiliation she had felt at the reception had matured now into something deeper, uglier. Not only jealousy, not only wounded pride. She was beginning to understand she might lose status, marriage, proximity to power, everything she had dressed herself in. "This ends badly for girls like you," she said softly to Deka. Deka met her gaze. "Maybe this time it ends badly for liars." Amaka's face changed by less than an inch, but it was enough. Then she left with Bako. The corridor stayed quiet for several seconds after the footsteps faded. Only when the silence settled again did Deka realize how hard her heart was pounding. She drew a breath and turned toward Tade. He was still staring at the far end of the corridor. "You shouldn't have done that," she said quietly, opened the room. "Defended me in front of them." At last he looked at her. "They were not attacking you because you are weak." No, Deka said. "They were attacking me because I am useful." A shadow of agreement crossed his face. "Both can be true," he said. Then he stepped into the room. Deka followed. The old suite felt like time had shut its eyes and refused to wake. Dust lay over the furniture in a soft grey film. Heavy curtains remained half drawn, turning the room into a dim chamber of preserved absence. A dressing table stood near the wall, its mirror veiled with an ivory cloth. On one side sat a carved wooden bed with untouched pillows. On the other, a small private sitting area with blue upholstery faded by years. The blue room. Mama Sade had not imagined it. Decca's throat tightened. Nothing here looked looted in the obvious sense. No drawers hanging open, no broken locks, no dramatic signs of intrusion, which made it worse. Someone had either searched with care or returned everything afterward. Tade moved slowly, as if every object might speak in his mother's voice if handled too roughly. Decca scanned the room with a different instinct. The instinct of someone raised among scarcity where hiding places mattered, where women concealed rent money in rice tins and stitched cash into hems, because visible security was never real security. Her eyes landed on the linen chest near the blue sitting chairs. "Is that the one Tade asked?" "I think so." They crossed together. The chest was cedar-old but well-made. Tade opened it. Inside lay folded sheets, yellowed lace, and a faint lingering scent of dried lavender. Decca knelt and began lifting each layer carefully. Nothing. Beneath the linen, the bottom panel felt solid, but one corner lifted with the slightest irregularity under her nails. "Wait," she said. Tade crouched beside her. Decca pressed the corner again. The wood gave a fraction. A hidden panel. Her pulse kicked. Tade slid a letter opener from the nearby writing table and eased it into the seam. The panel lifted with a soft, dry click. Both of them froze. Inside lay not an envelope, but a flat leather document sleeve wrapped in old blue cloth. On top of it rested something else, a small brass key attached to a tag that had only 3 handwritten words. "For my son." Tade did not touch it at first. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then very carefully he lifted the tag. His hand trembled, only once. "Enough." Decca looked at the document sleeve. "Open it." He did. Inside were copies, several of them. Share transfer drafts. Banking authorizations. Internal estate memoranda. A typed note initialed by his mother. And tucked between the pages, one photograph. Tade went still. Decca leaned closer and felt her stomach drop. The photograph showed Tade's mother standing in this very blue room beside another woman in a staff uniform, younger, thinner, frightened, but unmistakable. Mama Sad. And behind them, reflected faintly in the dressing mirror, stood Mazi Bako, smiling. For a moment, neither Decca nor Tade spoke. The old photograph lay across the open document sleeve, under the dim light of the blue room, and the air around it seemed to thicken with memory and threat. Tade held the edge of the photograph between 2 fingers, as though too much pressure might erase it again. Decca stared at the reflected figure in the mirror, Mazi Bako younger but unmistakable, standing behind the 2 women with that same composed, poisonous smile. It was not proof of murder. It was worse in a way. It was proof of presence, proof of proximity. Proof that Mama Sad had been exactly where she claimed to be in the room, connected to the missing documents near the woman who later died under the gaze of the man who had spent years pretending ignorance. Tade set the photograph down very carefully. Then he picked up the typed note initialed by his mother. His eyes moved over the page once. Then again slower. The muscles in his jaw tightened. He handed it to Decca without a word. Decca took it. The note was short, efficient, written by someone who understood both danger and time. It referenced irregular share authorizations. Estate transfers being moved without proper family consent, and a concern that internal interference had reached beyond finance into her medical routine. At the bottom, beside her initials, one sentence had been underlined twice. If anything happens to me, my son must never trust family unity over documented truth. Decca felt a chill run through her arms. She knew she whispered. Tade's voice came flat and cold. She knew enough to prepare for betrayal. Rain touched the windows again, softer now, almost like fingertips against glass. Beyond the room, the rest of the mansion remained silent. No footsteps, no voices, no servants passing. It felt as though the house itself had withdrawn to listen. Decca looked at the brass key attached to the tag. "For my son. Do you know what it opens?" she asked. Tade shook his head once. "Not yet." Decca turned back to the document sleeve. "Then we already have more than enough to stop him tomorrow." Tade did not answer immediately. He was looking not at the papers but at the room. The sealed curtains, the dust-covered dressing table, the untouched bed, the stillness his mother had been locked inside for years. Decca understood then that for him this was no longer only strategy. It was grief reopening in the exact shape of evidence. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter. He stood in this room while she prepared for him. Decca looked at him. She was documenting the theft, he continued, making copies, hiding records, and he was already close enough to watch. The realization hung between them like smoke. Decca forced herself back toward action. "Then we move now, before morning, before he has another chance." Tade blinked once as though coming back from somewhere darker. "Yes," he said. "You're right." They moved quickly after that. Tade photographed every page with his phone front and back, including the photograph and the handwritten tag. Then he called someone Decca had never met, a forensic document consultant he trusted outside the company and outside the family. The man would meet them at dawn in a secure office downtown to authenticate paper-age ink variation and signatures. After that, Tade made 3 more calls. Short, precise, merciless. One to his chief legal officer. One to an independent board member who owed loyalty to no branch of the family. And one to Chief Naji. That call was the most revealing. Decca stood by the door while Tade spoke, saying almost nothing, listening far more than he talked. But even from his side of the conversation, she could tell the balance of power was shifting. He did not plead. He did not explain emotionally. He spoke in dates, documents, exposure risk, fiduciary breaches, and emergency liability. By the end of the call, his tone had changed in the subtle way of a man who knew the listener had started retreating from the wrong side. When he ended it, he slipped the phone into his pocket. Chief Naji, Decca asked. "He'll attend the morning committee meeting in person." "That matters. It matters because men like him only sit near fires they believe can still burn them." Decca nodded slowly. They hid the original document sleeve in a new location inside a locked safe, concealed behind a lower panel in Tade's private study. The brass key and photograph remained with him. By the time they left the old suite, the first blue-gray hint of dawn had begun touching the eastern windows. Neither of them had slept. At 8:30, the Okoye corporate tower rose above Lagos in glass and steel, reflecting a city that moved too fast to care who bled behind boardroom doors. Decca had never entered through the executive lobby before. Today she did, wearing the simplest clean dress Mama Ife had pressed for her before sunrise, with a dark coat borrowed from Abeni, so she would not arrive looking like what the board expected when they heard the word maid. Still, the glances followed her. Reception staff recognized Tade and immediately straightened. Then they saw Decca beside him and tried not to react. Tried and failed. Good, Decca thought. Let them choke on surprise. The executive floor was colder than the mansion in a way that had nothing to do with air conditioning. Wealth concentrated itself differently in offices. Less perfume, less silk, more steel, more smiles with knives hidden in them. Inside the Emergency Governance Committee room, the key players were already seated. Chief Naji, 2 outside directors, the chief legal officer, 3 senior financial controllers, Amaka immaculate and pale seated near the far side, and Matsibako at the head end of the table opposite Tade, dressed in deep charcoal traditional wear, radiating offended dignity, as though the morning itself had inconvenienced him. Every eye in the room shifted when Deka entered behind Tade. Amaka spoke first, her tone smooth with contempt. "Have we reached the point where household staff are joining governance sessions?" Tade pulled out the chair beside the wall and said without looking at her. "She stays." Bako gave a weary sigh, performing patience for the room. "You see, this is precisely the instability I warned you about." Tade sat. He did not open with defense. That was the first surprise. He let Bako speak. The older man rose slowly, one hand resting on the table, as though carrying the burden of everyone's concern. He outlined reputational risk, emotional compromise, disruptive behavior in the household, the cancellation of the reception, investor unease. Then, elegantly, he suggested a temporary authority shift for the health of the company and the protection of family legacy. He never once called Tad weak. He called him distracted. He never once called Deka a liar. He called her a destabilizing influence of unknown intention. It was masterful and poisonous. Deka understood then why such men survived for decades. Evil rarely looked wild in rooms like this. It looked patient, reasonable, dressed. When Bako sat down, Chief Naji folded his hands. "Do you wish to respond?" Mr. Okoye Tade rose. No notes, no visible strain, no hesitation. "Yes," he said. "I do." He pressed a button on the remote beside the screen at the far wall. A scanned image appeared. The photograph, Mama Saad, Tade's mother, the blue room, and reflected in the mirror Mazi Bako. The room went silent, so fast it felt violent. Bako's face changed for the first time, only slightly. "Enough," Tade spoke with terrifying calm. "This image was recovered from a sealed private document cache hidden by my mother shortly before her death. It places my uncle in direct proximity to records and personnel he has repeatedly denied knowing anything about." He clicked again. The typed note appeared next, enlarged and legible. Then another click. The suspicious transfer drafts. Another. The banking authorizations. Another. A side-by-side comparison of signatures and irregular amendments. The chief legal officer shifted forward visibly now. One of the financial controllers went pale. Amaka said, "This proves nothing except that old family papers existed. Tade turned toward her. "Then you won't mind the independent authentication team currently verifying ink age, paper age, and signature sequence." "That hit?" Chief Naji's head lifted. "Currently." "Yes," Tade said. "As in this morning. Outside family influence." Bako spoke then controlled but sharper than before. "You are staging an ambush based on materials no one here has verified. I anticipated you would say that." Tade replied. He nodded toward the door. It opened. Deka's breath caught. Mama Sade did not walk in. She was too weak for that, but she appeared live on a secure video connection from the protected clinic room, seated upright with oxygen support and a doctor visible in the background. Her face was pale, but her eyes were clear. Bako went completely still. Amaka turned toward the screen in disbelief. Deka felt a surge of emotion so strong she nearly lost her balance. Her mother had agreed. Her mother had chosen not silence this time, but witness. Chief Nanaji straightened. "Who is this?" Tade answered. "A surviving former employee whose name was removed from household records after my mother's death." Mama Sade spoke. Her voice was thin, but in the silence of the boardroom every word landed. She described the argument she overheard between Bako and Tade's mother, the altered documents, the hidden envelope, the threat in the blue room, the erased staff entry, the flight from the bus park after being followed. When she finished, no one spoke. Bako stood abruptly. "This is absurd. A sick woman can be coached. Then Deka rose. It was not planned. It simply happened. All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, feeling every beat of her heart in her throat. "Then let's talk about coaching," she said, "because people like you always say the poor are confused when we remember too much." Bako's face darkened. Deka continued, voice steady now. "You called my mother a liar because she was a servant. You thought my poverty would make me easy to shame. You thought truth would sound small if it came from someone in an apron." She looked around the room. "But theft does not become dignity because it wears silk. Poison does not become family loyalty because it is hidden inside a mansion." The room was utterly still. Then Tad stepped away from the screen, came around the table, and stopped beside her. Every person there watched. Every person understood something irreversible was happening. He looked at Bako once, then at Amaka, then at the board. And in a voice so calm it felt like judgment itself, he said, "I am formally requesting criminal referral emergency suspension of all authority tied to Madzi Bako Okoye and immediate internal seizure of every document route he has touched in the last 15 years. He paused. Then, before shock could settle, he turned to Deka. The entire room held its breath. Tade reached into his inner jacket pocket and drew out a small ring box. Amaka gasped first. Chief Nanaji half rose from his seat. Deka's mind blanked. No, not here. Not now. And yet Tade dropped to one knee on the polished boardroom floor anyway. The most feared CEO in the room looked up at the maid who had defied him on her first day, and said clearly enough for every witness to hear, "You came into my house with nothing but truth, courage, and the kind of loyalty money cannot buy. You stood up to me when no one else would. You stood beside me when my own blood chose deceit. So let everyone in this room understand exactly where I stand." He opened the box. Inside the ring caught the boardroom light like a final verdict. "Deka," he said, "will you marry me?" For a heartbeat the boardroom stopped, belonging to time. No one spoke. No one shifted. Even the city noise beyond the glass walls seemed to fall away from the tower, as if Lagos itself had paused to witness the impossible. The ring in Tad's open hand caught the cold morning light, and the reflection moved softly across the polished floor where he knelt. Deka could hear only one thing, her own breathing, not because she had imagined romance and finally received it. This was not the fantasy of a poor girl plucked from hardship by a powerful man. Nothing about their story had been soft enough for fantasy. This moment stood on blood betrayal evidence, grief and truth dragged into daylight with bare hands. That was what made it overwhelming. He meant it, not as pity, not as performance, not as rescue. He meant it as a choice. Across the room, Amaka looked as though someone had torn the ground from beneath her. Her face had gone pale beneath perfect makeup, and for the first time since Deka had known her, there was nothing polished left in her expression. Only disbelief, fury, humiliation. Madzi Bako recovered faster. Men like him always did. "This is obscene," he said sharply. "A governance meeting is not a theater for emotional instability." Tade did not look away from Deka. "Then perhaps you should have thought of that before turning family theft into company policy." Chief Nanaji rose halfway from his chair, clearly stunned, but too politically seasoned to lose his balance for long. His voice came out careful, measured. "Mr. Okoye, perhaps we should separate personal matters from—" "No," Tade said. Now he stood still, holding the ring box, and turned to face the room. The shift in him was immediate. He was no longer only a son confronting inherited betrayal. He was once again the man who ran empires and broke predators with numbers. "You all need to understand something," he said. "This is not a distraction from the matter at hand. It is the final exposure of it." His gaze moved across the boardroom. "For years, this family and this company have been built on a sickness, The belief that image matters more than truth, that wealth excuses cruelty, that poor people can be used, erased, and humiliated, while the powerful continue calling themselves respectable. He paused. That sickness ends now. The silence after that sentence carried weight. Decca stood frozen beside him, every nerve alive. Part of her wanted to tell him to stop, to finish the legal fight first, to avoid giving the board one more reason to call him reckless. Another part of her understood instantly why he was doing this here now, in front of these exact witnesses. Because everything in their world had always been hidden in private. The lies, the poisoning, the document theft, the intimidation of servants, the manipulation of inheritance, the class contempt. So he was choosing to answer in public. Chief Naji cleared his throat. The legal issues remain the priority, and they will be handled, Tade replied. Immediately. He handed the ring box to Decca. For one brief second, then crossed back to the screen and spoke with clipped authority. Effective now, all legal and financial access tied to Madzi Bako Okoye is frozen pending independent investigation. All estate and company archives are to be placed under digital and physical hold. Security chain of custody begins today. No deletions, no transfers, no private removals. The chief legal officer, who until then had looked cautious, finally found his voice. I can initiate emergency preservation orders within the hour. You will initiate them now, Tade said. The man nodded. Beko took one step forward. You are overreaching. No, said Chief Naji quietly. Every head turned. The older businessman's face had changed, not into sympathy. Men like him rarely moved that way. But calculation had become conclusion. You are exposed, Chief Nanaji said to Bako. There is a difference. Bako's mouth tightened. Chief Nanaji continued. A hidden cache, financial irregularities, a surviving witness on protected video, authentication underway. This is beyond family quarrel. It is now corporate liability and potential criminal conduct. That was the moment Decca knew the tide had fully turned, not because truth had suddenly made everyone noble, but because truth had become too expensive to ignore. Amaka stood abruptly. This is madness. Tade has manipulated all of you with a servant sob story and some conveniently discovered papers. Decca looked at her. There was no hatred left in her now, only clarity. Amaka had never loved Tade. She had loved adjacency to power. She had loved being chosen by a surname, by a fortune, by a family name that made rooms part around her. Decca could see it plainly now, and perhaps Amaka knew she could. Tade answered before anyone else could. You attempted to frame Decca for theft in my own home. You stood beside my uncle while he threatened a witness. And you still think this room is about your embarrassment. Amaka's composure snapped. You destroyed me for her, she shouted. For a maid, Tade's voice cut clean through hers. No, you destroyed yourself because you thought decency was beneath you. The words landed like a slap. Amaka stared at him, chest rising and falling, eyes bright with fury and humiliation. Then she turned toward Decca with all the desperation of a woman whose mirror had finally cracked. You think this makes you special? She said. You think a ring changes where you come from? Decca answered quietly, and that quietness made the room listen harder. No, she said. Truth does not change where I come from. It only exposes what you are. Amaka flinched. It was small. Enough. Security entered moments later at the request of legal counsel. Not violent, not dramatic, merely official. That was the final humiliation for Bako, not being dragged out like a thug, but escorted like a disgraced executive whose myth had expired. He looked at Tade one last time. You are still your father's son. Emotion will ruin you too. Tade met his gaze without blinking. No. Silence ruined him. Bako said nothing after that. He and Amaka were led out separately. The door closed, and for the first time all morning the air in the boardroom felt breathable. The remaining directors moved quickly then, because institutions love morality only after power has chosen a side. Votes were called. Emergency measures were signed. Independent counsel was assigned. Audit teams were activated. Access controls were tightened. Chief Naji formally seconded the freeze order. The chief legal officer requested copies of everything. The financial controllers, pale and sweating, began preparing records before anyone had to ask twice. In less than an hour, 15 years of buried manipulation had begun to unravel. Yet through all of it, Decca barely heard the details. She was still holding the ring box. Tade noticed eventually. When the immediate legal motions were done, he came back to her near the window. His expression had lost none of its intensity, but something gentler moved beneath it now. Not softness exactly. Something earned. "You still haven't answered me," he said. Decca looked down at the ring, then up at him. The truth inside her was complicated. She loved his courage. She respected the fact that he had chosen truth over blood. She had seen him wounded, arrogant, grieving, disciplined, ruthless, and unexpectedly honorable. But she also knew pain too well to confuse gratitude with love in one reckless second. So she answered with honesty, the only thing that had brought either of them this far. "Yes," she said. Then she added, "But not because you saved me." Something eased in his eyes. "That would have been the wrong answer anyway," he said. A breath of laughter escaped her, then startled and real. The first in what felt like years. By afternoon, the story had already begun spreading beyond the tower. Not the proposal first, though, that would come like wildfire once leaked. The scandal broke ahead of it. Governance, suspension, internal investigation, possible criminal referral, historic estate fraud. Business journalists circled like hawks. Rival companies began sending messages. Lawyers arrived. Phones rang without pause. But within that storm, one quieter victory mattered more. Mama Sade remained safe. Her statement, combined with the recovered cash and the forensic review, was enough to put her under official witness protection support through legal counsel. She cried when Decca told her, not loudly, not dramatically. The crying of someone who had spent too many years living as prey and could not yet believe the hunt had shifted direction. 3 weeks later, formal charges were filed. Over the next months, more evidence surfaced. Hidden transfers, bribed estate staff, medical tampering records that, while incomplete, aligned with testimony and timeline irregularities. Bako's network began collapsing under pressure from the very systems he had manipulated for years. Men who served him started talking once they realized his power was no longer sheltering them. Amaka's family withdrew publicly from all alliance talks, blaming unforeseen reputational concerns. It was a cowardly statement. It was also a surrender. At the Okoye mansion, the changes came more slowly, but they came. The first locked thing Tade ordered removed was not a safe. It was fear. He dismissed staff who had acted as private spies for Bako. He increased wages for the domestic workers. He placed household employment records under independent oversight. He restored names that had been erased from old ledgers, including Mama Sade's. He reopened rooms that had been sealed by grief and made sure his mother's suite was no longer treated like a curse to be hidden, but like a life to be honored. And in the entrance hall where portraits once lied by omission, he commissioned a new family display. No erased figures, no polished falsehood. Only truth as complete as truth could still be made. Months later, when Mama Sade was finally strong enough to walk without trembling, she returned to the estate for the first time in years. Decca walked beside her up the front steps. She expected collapse, panic, tears. Instead, Mama Sade stood in the doorway, looked around the hall where fear had once ruled her, and whispered, "It feels smaller now." Decca smiled. "That's because the lies are gone. In time, the company changed too. Not magically, not perfectly. Real justice rarely arrived like a song. It arrived through policy consequence, transparency, and men forced at last to stop mistaking wealth for innocence." Tade established a foundation in his mother's name, focused on medical care access and legal support for domestic workers and low-income women trapped by powerful families. People called it strategic philanthropy. Decca knew better. It was grief finally choosing to heal someone besides itself. Their wedding, when it came, was nothing like the glittering trap Amaka once imagined for herself. It was held outdoors at sunset beneath open sky, attended by workers' friends, recovered family truth, and the kind of witnesses who did not need chandeliers to understand dignity. Mama Ife cried openly. Abeni laughed through tears. Chief Naji attended, and to everyone's shock, smiled more than once. Mama Sade touched Decca's cheek before the ceremony and said, "Now I can breathe." And Decca believed her, because in the end the story had not really been about a maid catching a CEO's attention. It had been about what happened when a poor woman refused to kneel before a lie, and what happened when a powerful man finally proved that love without truth was only another elegant prison. Tade took Decca's hand at the altar just as the light turned gold across the gathered faces. No masks, no bargains, no silence. Only a home built at last by two people who had stared directly into inherited darkness and chosen not to pass it on. After everything, the deepest lesson was not that the rich can fall or that the poor can rise. It was that truth survives in places pride never bothers to search. Sometimes it survives in a servant's memory, in a mother's fear, in an erased name, in a hidden key, or in the courage of one person who decides humiliation is no longer a price worth paying for safety. This story also reminds us that family is not sacred when it protects evil, and loyalty is not noble when it demands silence from the wounded. Real love does not ask you to help bury injustice. Real love stands beside truth, even when truth tears open the house, the name, and the future you thought you wanted. And healing does not begin when pain is forgotten. It begins when pain is finally named, faced, and answered with courage. So tell me in the comments what moved you most in Decca and Tade's story. And if you were in Decca's place, would you have spoken the truth on that first day? If you enjoyed this story of justice, betrayal, and healing, subscribe. And stay with me for more powerful emotional stories.